Okay, so now we're in the first sections of dealing with inputs, and we're going to teach you about forms. This is so important because this is just adding another layer to what you've already learned, and it's bringing it all together. This is that a piece of the puzzle that is really making the picture look really like a picture now, because by learning this, you're ready to start building applications. So, if you're new to this channel and you would like to follow along with the curriculum, the link is in the description. Okay, let's get into it. Forms. As a user of the web, you know that web pages both display and accept data. In this chapter, we're going to learn more about how web pages handle data input using HTML forms. An HTML form is used to accept input from the user and send that data to the server. Create a form. To declare a form in HTML, use the form tag or element. Tag with open and closing tags. This form element will serve as container for various types of other elements that are designed to capture input from the user. So what are we saying here? See, the form is, let's think of it in your tree. It's the parent, and inside of this form is going to have children. It's going to have nested elements. Now understand, body is an element, and that is the parent or the container for everything that's going to be displayed in the browser, like so. Right here, your web pages, and everything is broken down into small pieces or branches that are inside of the body. And one of those branches is form. And again, inside of form, you're going to have let's say leaves that'll be inside the form that you're going to use different elements for. So that's just an illustration and an analogy that I'm hoping that will connect with you. So here, an empty form will not appear on a web page until inputs have been added inside of it. Below, we have added one basic input tag right here. And notice that it has a self-closing. It's a self-closing tag. So here, the input, we have to add this attribute, and it's called type. And what type of input is this? It's a text. So let's go a little bit further, and so we can understand what this attribute does as well. So input element. The input element is used to add interactive fields, which allow the user to enter data. Input elements have two very important attributes, name and type. Pay attention to this. The name attribute is used to identify the input's value when the data is submitted. The value, like here. The type attributes define which type of value of the input represents. Here is representing text. Now we have different types, so we're going to learn those different types. But pay close attention to this right here, this name. This is important to understand because it's the value. What are we passing in here? The user name. Name doesn't mean like the string name, like put my name Terrence in it. It is a string, but you have to understand, because of this attribute, what is the name of this attribute represent. So we're saying username, name could be email, but this name is going to be connected to when we get to the label. That'll make more sense. Notice that input type text tags are self-closing. Self-closing tags are single tags with a / at the end. Values are not submitted for an input unless it has a name attribute. This is why we say this is important. It says values are not submitted for an input unless it has a name. We're letting you know that needs to be there for it to be able to be submitted now. Not when you're just playing around with the code and you're not going to submit anything, but you need that name to be able to submit it. Now, this is what I was going to allude to with the labels. Forms normally contain more than one input. Label tags are used to provide a textual label which informs the user of the purpose of the field. The simplest usage of label tags is to wrap them around input tags. So here we go. This is what you're going to see a lot. You have the label, which we have username, and we're wrapping it around the input tag. So this is conventional right there. This is something that you're going to use quite frequently. You can do it the other way, where you can separate the label from the actual input. But in order, if you do that, you're going to have to put the name attribute inside of the label so it can connect with this username. So here, this is what it will look like in your browser. Username, team name. It's going to have some, has some styling because it doesn't look exactly like that. It may not look like that, depends on your browser. Now, look at how it is set up. It has the username and it follows behind team name, is in line together. But you notice here that this looks like this is on two separate lines. Something we'll talk about later on how to style this to where if you want username on one line by itself and team name on the second line by itself, you have to use some CSS in order to make that happen. Now, a second way to relate a label tag to an input is to use the ID attribute of input and the for attribute of label, like so. This is what I was talking about if you separate it. So you need this for. So for username, it has to be connected to this right here. It's going to connect to this name right here. That's what connects it, the label, to the input if you don't nest it. So the two are related by setting for in label for username equal to the ID of input username. Okay, now let me make sure I clarify that. I kind of said that wrong. Hopefully, let me fix that right now. I make mistakes, so I apologize. No, the for is for this ID username. This is what we need the ID for right here. Is we have to use the username. We need the for attribute, and the ID attribute is what connects the two. This right here is for the submission. Let me make sure I clarified that. I apologize for that. Maybe it was a little bit confusing when I said that. Now, these two attributes must be equal. When for is used, the input does not have to be inside of the label. So what that means, the input, if we put the input inside of the label, we don't have to use this. But if we separate the two, which use cases you may do that, you need to use this for attribute, and it has to connect with this ID right here attribute. Now, what happens when a label is clicked? The answer depends on what the label is associated to. For text inputs, when the label is clicked, then the input gains focus. That's a term you must remember. An element with focus is currently selected by the browser and ready to receive input. This happens when you just click on it. When you click on inside of a form, it highlights it basically. It brings it into focus so that it lets you know where you are in the form. Now, try clicking on the username and team name label below and see what happens. See, label, username, input, and then we have the label, right? So we click it. I don't see anything happen. For non-text inputs, when the label is clicked, a value is selected. This behavior can be seen with radio and checkbox elements, which we will learn more about soon. So let's look at this for a second here. So it's supposed to focus. So do I see it focusing? So what makes it focus then? So if I go back here, what happens when a label is clicked? The answer depends on what the label is associated to. So I have a label here, and we got the type text name. And that's the type right there. The type is the text. The name is user and label. It should highlight. I don't see it highlighting here, focusing here in my browser, but it just could be my browser that's not picking it up. But I'm assuming that this wants it to focus. Now, click on the label text to the associated checkbox input element to gain focus. So when I click that, you see it has this check. It does this for it by default, which you can style this to make this look different if you would like to. And so it has a label, subscribe to the newsletter. Just for readability, we put it on two separate lines. We put it on different lines. Input text checkbox. Because the type is a checkbox, and then we have the name newsletter. This is the attribute. Remember, you need this name attribute for submission. So when you click on it and click off of it, this is what the focus is right here. Now, again, you can style this to look different, make that look however you want it to look. Now, the value attribute. The value attribute of an input tag can be used to set the default value. If the value attribute is declared, then the browser will show that value in the input. This means the user can choose to update the value by typing in the input box. So this is what this means. So here we have the label, open and closing tag. We have a language, and then we have the input in here. The value says JavaScript. That's what's inside of here. So that's by default. If you want to have a value there, there's another attribute that's called placeholder. Placeholder is just it highlight. It's not a highlight. What it is, it's the same as saying if you want a placeholder and you call it JavaScript, it'll just place a placeholder in here, and it will be very light, a light gray. But as soon as you click into it and start typing, you don't have to delete anything. But if you see with this value, it had to be deleted. So let me see if it'll let me put placeholder here. No, I can't edit that. But if I was to take this and put this inside of, open up your VS Code, and you put the attribute placeholder here, you will see the difference. And so check your understanding. This is just the first part of learning about forms and the inputs. So take your time to go through this. Again, the more you do, the more you improve. See you in the next section.